Hello, come on in. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Hopefully, this is a relaxing time of day for you. I am wishing you all either lunch or a good coffee, and hopefully, you can sit back and relax. We'll give everyone one more minute to hop in and we'll get started. We have so many people joining us today. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to say hi in the chat. We'll use the chat to connect with one another, and we'll use the Q&A box to ask questions related to our content today. So excited to see so many people here. All right. I'm gonna pause my poppy music here for a second. Okay. Hello, everyone. So excited to see everyone here. Feel free to say hello in the chat, ask questions using the Q&A box. It's so great to have everyone. I was amazed. I think I saw every possible role during registration, and all just here with the shared goal to support self-regulation. So that's pretty incredible. I also want to say thank you for all of the great questions that were submitted ahead of time. I was just blown away by how thoughtful they were. Really hoping today's session, addresses some of those wonderings. As a quick heads up, you'll see by our slide, we are focused on elementary students today. I did see some people looking for secondary, so I just wanted to set that expectation. There's definitely a lot of strategies that can be applied to both. But if you are looking for more secondary specific content, feel free to let us know in that post webinar poll. All right, let's get started. So introductions, I'm Jess. I'm the Senior Curriculum Specialist here at Everyday Speech. I'm also a former school psychologist in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Hello to my neighbors there. And a longtime Everyday Speech user. And I'm joined by my fantastic colleague Duncan today. I'll let him say hello.
Hello, my name's Duncan Myers, the head of research and implementation at Everyday Speech. My background is in psychology, community psychology, and seems like another life ago, but I was a therapist for groups and families and individuals. And I think self-regulation was important for everybody I worked with and even myself as a therapist.
Awesome. So just some housekeeping items if you didn't hear already. Use the chat to say hi, connect with others, share your thoughts, but drop questions in the Q&A box. Our team is going to answer as many as possible live throughout the webinar, and then we'll also follow up at the end. And as for resources, you'll get a recording of the webinar, the slides, and all of the free visual tools that we'll reference after the session. And lastly, I just want to shout out for those of you who are unfamiliar, Duncan and I work for Everyday Speech. So yes, today we'll be discussing some things that align with our digital social skills curriculum, but none of what we're talking about today requires access or a subscription to Everyday Speech. So hopefully you find value regardless. And I am the first to admit that self-regulation is a very, very, very big topic. I could make this a 100-part webinar series, but we only have 45 minutes. We potentially have more slides than we'll cover, but the deck is built to be very useful and that you can walk away regardless. So with that, let's dive in. So I want to set a foundation with a few quick truths. Everyone in this room is going to bring different experiences and expertise and perspectives. And that's a really good thing. So let's just celebrate and assume positive intent as we learn together. Second, Just to be honest, I don't have all the answers. If I did, I'd be up there with the likes of Guru Dr. Becky. But alas, at the elementary level, growth is going to take some time. So I like to think of it as planting seeds. And sometimes that means we don't see the impact of our work until years later when we get a text from someone at the high school that our student's doing well, but just know that it's happening. And lastly, my goal for you is to walk away with something new. That doesn't necessarily always mean a brand new strategy. It might just be a new way to apply something you already know. Because so often success isn't in always what we do, but how we do it. So for our agenda, we're going to take a quick look at how we talk about self-regulation first, because I think it's important to set our foundation, but most of the time we'll be spending on proactive strategies that we can use right away. And if time allows, we're going to talk about some of those tougher moments too. And we're going to hopefully leave room for questions. And for anyone interested, Mariah is going to be giving us a quick look at the everyday speech platform at the end. So to kick us off, I'm going to have Duncan address how we're thinking about self-regulation.
Thank you, Jess. And there are a lot of different definitions out there. We thought this one was helpful because it really touches on what a lot of the different self-regulation definitions include. This is from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And self-regulation, when it's talked about in the literature, often focuses on behavior, linking behavior to thoughts and emotions, setting goals, achieving goals. And also, sometimes it's called different things. So self-control, self-regulation, self-management. And so the big takeaway is it's multifaceted. There's a lot to it. There's common elements. And what's really important is being, identifying what is most relevant when it comes to self-regulation for the students that you support. And so, Jess, I'm going to kick it back to you and how we might, talk about it with a student.
Yeah. So often I think we forget this part. We have expectations of our students and what we want them to be doing, but we forget to kind of walk through what is it we're asking of them. So this is my personal favorite analogy, but if you have one you love, I would love it if you drop it in the chat. And heads up, this story features our very lovable everyday speech mascot in claymation form, nonetheless. And his name's Selby. So imagine your brain as a ship, and self-regulation is like being the captain of that ship. So the sea is going to represent your environment and your emotions. Sometimes they're calm and sometimes stormy. And the captain's job is really to navigate that ship. So they might have to adjust the sails, steer the wheel, and make decisions to keep the ship steady, no matter what. So when the waters get rough, like with big feelings, the captain's not going to abandon the wheel. Instead, they're going to stay calm and assess what's going on around them. They're going to make adjustments. They might have to slow down their ship. They might have to steer different. They might even have to anchor the ship for a minute until it's safe to continue, kind of like when we take a break. The tools on our ship, like your maps and your compasses and your sails, those are all your different strategies, like your breathing exercises and movement and breaks. And using the right tool at the right time is what's going to help us. And I always like to stress that sometimes the captain is going to need help from their crew, like their teachers, friends, or family. They might have to adjust the sail or give them some directions. But just like a good captain, learning self-regulation is going to take practice and awareness and support. And over time, the more we use our tools, the smoother our journey will become. So this is kind of my fluffy example, how I explain it to my own kids, sometimes with eye rolls, but it matters how we talk about it. But let's kind of set our foundation and see what the research says. So back to you, Duncan.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. So I know a lot of us are here already know that self-regulation is an important concept, and it's really a core component of emotional intelligence, important for personal relationships, professional relationships, in school, even when kiddos get to the workplace later in their lives. And we've got a image of a brain here. It's really linked to that prefrontal cortex, a lot of the helping us focus attention, and it's really related to executive functioning. So it's really a foundation for success. Next slide, please. It's also linked to academic achievement for both children, adolescents. Again, we were talking about focusing attention, and really empowering young people to use their self-control skills. That second bullet point there, that Moffitt and colleagues studies from 2011, they followed children from birth to 32 years. So talking about multiple decades where some of this research is coming from. And we're also starting to see more evidence for mindfulness-based interventions and how they can help with academic performance by helping young people with self-regulation. Next slide, please. It's also important for positive peer relationships. So this study by Jones and colleagues is also took place over multiple decades. So they followed young kids from kindergarten all the way until they were 25 and found a lot of positive benefits. Even when they were young adults, as it relates to education, employment, and important outcomes such as those. It also supports positive behavior. So really seeing that higher self-regulation is related to students being less likely to be disruptive, less likely to be impulsive, and it's really beneficial. There's a lot of proactive strategies that have been found through research to be beneficial for kids, and Jess is going to get into some of those in the next couple of slides. And then that last one, it's really linked to positive outcomes over the long term. As I was sharing, some of these studies that we're referencing followed kids for 3 decades. And so what we're seeing is, adapting to setbacks, and resilience by definition is healthy development in the face of adversity, and self-regulation is a huge part of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Duncan. So yeah, it's no surprise to any of you, I'm sure, that, the research is there on the importance of self-regulation. But with that, we want to get right into our proactive strategies, because when we think about self-regulation, it starts long before a student is dysregulated, right? So by building these strategies into their environment and their existing routines, we can help reduce the frequency or at least the intensity of dysregulation. And hopefully the goal is to teach students to use these things on their own. So we can't talk about self-regulation without considering sensory needs. So the physical environment is going to play a huge role in student well-being. And, these spaces that we create are going to help students recognize what they need before they escalate. So I am really curious to see what spaces you're all working with. So I am going to launch a poll real quick, and it is going to give us a little insight into this. So hopefully you all can see that. So does your building have a designated sensory space, either in the classroom or in another area of the building? Give you a couple more seconds. Okay, so I'm sharing the results now. Good news. I am very happy to see the majority of you have one. That's great. But I am not surprised to see that many of you also have one that's not being used as maybe intended. And for those of you who don't have a spot, I'm sorry, but hopefully we'll provide some tips for that as well. Okay. So could these spaces even include? So I always like to consult my favorite OTs for the very best tips. Definitely some of my favorite people in every place I've worked. But our sensory tools could include anything from those, small or larger fidgets, weighted blankets, noise canceling headphones, flexible seating options. I'm a big fan of visual supports. My office was covered with them, from emotion charts to breathing visuals, self-regulation cards. My laminator was always working overtime. But a calming, structured setup, I really like to think about the calmest classrooms that I was ever invited into, and what did it look like, feel like? And a lot of those sensory considerations were taken into mind. But space alone is not enough. It's only as effective as the pre-teaching behind it. So, when we talk about these spaces, we also need to like model and role play and discuss expectations so students know how to use it. It's one thing to have a calming corner in your room, but have we talked to kids about what that looks like when we use it? So, natural consequences should be a part of the conversation when we talk about how we care for our space and what happens if it's misused. One of my strategies for my people without a space, break bags. They're a great alternative. So in my last building, we actually secured funding from the PTO, and we were able to fund 20 different break bags that, I kept in my office and kind of loaned out as we saw a need. But it allowed students to regulate anywhere. So they could go right into the hallway or within their classroom even and have a designated break bag or their toolkit accessible to them. But in case you don't have those tools yet, we wanted to make sure you all left with something. So you're all leaving with our 17-page Calming Corner implementation guide and material bundle. This has some fantastic visuals to get a space set up in your rooms as well. So next, I want to talk about the use of mindfulness and movement. We learned from what Duncan shared that this has been shown to improve classroom performance. But what does this look like in the context of what we do on a daily basis? So I like to think of it as just the briefest opportunities to check in with your students throughout the day. So these are like 30 seconds during morning meeting or before a math lesson, lining up for lunch, or even after recess. I would often go grab kids off the playground to head to session with me, right? So a post-recess mindfulness moment might be something like, hey, recess was so fun today, but now it's time to help our bodies and minds get ready for learning. So why don't we start by just taking 3 big breaths together? And as you breathe in, I want you to fill your belly up like the biggest balloon. And as you breathe out, I want you to feel your shoulders relax. Okay, now we're going to wiggle our fingers and toes. They might still be warm from running around. Why don't you try giving them a squeeze and releasing? And now, I want you to think about one fun thing you did at recess. And I want you to close your eyes and think about it for a second. All right, now it's a bubble, let it float away. Um, and then some grounding, right? Like I want you to close your eyes, feel your feet on the floor, your body in your chair. And it looks like you're right here now and you're ready to learn with me. So this is just one way that you can take a very high energy setting and transition easily to focused learning. And of course, I want to shout out that Everyday Speech has a very robust mindfulness library that will do a lot of this work for you. And Mariah will give you a little sneak peek of that at the end. So obviously, self-regulation and emotional literacy go hand in hand as well. You really can't build one without the other. And one of the best ways I've found to strengthen both is through a daily check-in. So this is just a quick start to your day or to your session, and it helps students practice emotional recognition, but it's also going to give you some insights to build a stronger relationship, right? So by doing these check-ins, we can have conversations with our students that wouldn't naturally come up. I'm obviously a huge fan of role play and perspective taking. You'll see these strategies embedded throughout Everyday Speech's video modeling lessons, but they can be used anywhere. But not every student is eager to role play, so it's important to provide multiple different ways of engagement too. So you might have the student provide the scenario, and if you're an actor like me, you might act it out yourself. You might act it out as the teacher and have them provide the feedback for you. You might use drawings or writing to have them express their response. And it doesn't hurt to have some little figurines or puppets as well in your room. And of course, one of my favorite everyday speech resources are our social emojis, which you'll get today as well. These, laminating a few sets of these was a game changer for me. I used them for check-ins, games. They're fantastic when working with our non-speaking students to increase engagement, and I just found them incredibly beneficial. But if I do convince you to buy one thing today, let it be this tiny little visual timer. I promise I do not have any affiliate links on Amazon or anything. The big ones, I found that they break because the students like to twist them up. But these are gold. They have a hard plastic face. And I had a whole drawer of them because I was constantly loaning them out because so many challenges can just be avoided by giving students a clear transition warning with choice. So timers are not just about counting down, they're about giving students back a sense of control. So even when an activity isn't negotiable, we can still offer these like micro choices that are going to ease transitions. So my favorite ones to use with my own kids are, do you want to start the timer or should I? I'm guessing you know the answer to that. Or if you have 5 minutes before you need to be somewhere, do you want 2 more minutes of playtime or four? So these tiny moments of predictability just provide some like autonomy and go a long way in reducing that resistance that we tend to see. So this is my favorite slide, my favorite topic. We all know breaks are essential for regulation, but what I found is when we pair breaks with responsibility, we take a good intervention and we go to a great intervention. So one of the most impactful ideas that I've come across, and a book recommendation for sure, is from Relationship Responsibility and Regulation. And this is by Kristen Sowers and Pete Hall. Give them a shout out if you've read it. But that second R, responsibility, that is the game changer I've found. So when we give students real meaningful roles that aren't contingent on behavior, that's an important part. It's not contingent on a good day or a bad day. We see a shift because kids want to feel helpful. And when we combine that with structured movement or a very purposeful task, it's just a win for everyone. So one of my favorite examples of this is the famous coffee cart. So it builds planning, organization, teamwork, and collaboration. And let's be honest, any intervention that provides exhausted teachers some caffeine is going to be a win. I also encourage my students to take a break when they need one. And I know there's sometimes concern about overuse, but my feeling is let's cross that bridge later. I'd rather see a student recognize how they're feeling and step away than swear at their teacher, right? So when a student needs to ask a break, um, let's make it easy. So, for example, I once worked with a student who wasn't able to verbalize when they needed to step away. So we just created a simple visual pass. So no words required, and it just became a really discreet way for them to self-regulate. And if you need an easy way to create tools like this, I'm not sure everyone's aware, but Canva, which is a design platform, offers free premium accounts for educators. This changed my life. All you have to do is upload your school ID badge. So if you walk away with anything today, let it be that you can have a free Canva account. So a quick example of a responsibility-based intervention. I had a student, let's call him Dev, and he struggled with peer interactions at recess. And all the traditional consequences were not working, like removing him from the playground or restricting play. That's not helping anyone. So instead, we gave him a responsibility. So instead, as a recess patrol leader or a buddy bench helper, he supported peers in finding play partners on the playground. And he helped to keep the playground safe. And he found that to be a very important and impactful job. He was also a post-recess organizer and assisted with cleanup and transitions. And what I hear a lot is, well, why does he get a special job when other kids follow the rules? But I don't see this as a reward. It was a way to meet his needs, and it just so happened that he was contributing really positively. And, instead of removing him from recess, we gave him a role that channeled that energy into something of leadership, and the behavior shift was immediate and benefited everyone. So, just a reminder that fair isn't always what's equal, but about giving kids what they need to succeed. So, if anyone else has seen a responsibility-based intervention work, drop us some info in the chat because I love to come up with new ideas as well. This is just a fun way to encourage self-regulation, but through a class-wide challenge, right? When we gamify the process, it's going to build motivation and it's going to make self-regulation feel like a strength. to, strengthen rather than something that they have to do or that their teacher's requesting of them. And then all of a sudden, something kind of magical happens when you start to notice them doing it on their own after you've provided some positive reinforcement. And that's when you know you might have broken through. So, of course, self-regulation isn't just about controlling behavior. It's also about building awareness over one's actions, right? So I love self-monitoring, and self-monitoring is going to help students recognize patterns over time. So I'm going to launch another poll. Hopefully these are not annoying and are actually interesting. Let's see, self-monitoring. So how familiar are you, or how often are you using it, I guess? I'd be curious um, how many times you've tried it. Get a couple seconds here. Okay. So great to hear this is not new to too many people and that some of you are trying it. That's awesome. It can be tricky to kind of get off the ground, but is definitely a great tool once you find kind of how it works for different students. So simple tools, even like a daily box chart, are going to give students a really structured way to reflect on what's working and what's challenging. And where I see the real difference being is when you build in the self-monitoring check-in with a teacher check-in, it's going to help like align and create consistency. So I can't tell you how many times I would have a student run into my office and say, "Hey, math went great today." And then 5 minutes later, the teacher knocks on my door and is like, "Math was a disaster." So where's the disconnect? And when we can kind of pair a student's self-monitoring with a teacher's reflection and they're able to connect, it's like magic happens. So Intervention Central is just, it's a great resource. It has evidence-based strategies and it talks a lot about self-monitoring. It's kind of a dated website, but for anyone familiar, it has awesome tools. So it helps you kind of get started. I created this little simple box chart on Canva. So sometimes the simplest tools are the best starting out. So let's talk about my student Jade. So Jade had anxiety and frequently shut down and refused to do tasks without really any obvious trigger. So in order to better understand her needs, we introduced this like very simple emotion check-in where she rated her feelings throughout the day. And just this little insight into her day gave us, helped us identify what were the biggest stressors. And we were able to build the intervention around this data, right? And so we were able to provide more predictable routines and over time that avoidance decreased and her confidence grew as a result. So think of it as an opportunity to collect some like data that you wouldn't otherwise have on your student. I saw a lot of people write in about co-regulation, so great to connect on that. But really, this is our foundation of self-regulation. Students are going to borrow the calm from the adults around them. So one intervention that I am guilty of probably overusing, and anyone who has worked with me who's possibly here is probably laughing, but check in, check out. And why do I love it so much? Because even if the intervention is a complete fail, at the very least, it is helping a student build a connection with an adult. And ideally, this adult is not someone in their classroom or even their immediate team. And this becomes the highlight of their day. I also really believe in modeling self-regulation whenever possible. So often a student would catch me after school and want to talk, and I would say, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you, but can I be honest? I have a really big meeting and I'm really nervous about it. And I think I need to go take a few deep breaths and get a glass of water and go for a walk. Can I find you in the morning?" And it's like they would look at me with these like shocked eyes and realize in that moment, like, wow, she's human. Like she's navigating the world just like me and learning to use her strategies. So their buy-in is definitely going to start with ours. I've already touched on how much I like role play, but I'll say it one more time that if you can think of any possible problem or scenario that your student might encounter, it doesn't hurt to role play it. Even just a few minutes of practice can make such a huge difference when they face the real situation. So I always liked to end my sessions with role play of the day, where I would have students act out a scenario and maybe the other student provides feedback. But those "what would you do" questions are so powerful in building flexible thinking and problem solving skills. And it's amazing that when those tough moments eventually come up, you can go back and you can say, "Hey, remember when we talked about this? Can you try that for me?" Um, and shout out to anyone else who was obsessed with the show What Would You Do on ABC, because I feel like it somehow like influenced my career choice. But if role playing feels too big, video modeling is absolutely the next best thing. And seeing same age peers be able to demonstrate these skills is so much more impactful than me talking at my students and asking them what I want them to do. And I just so happen to know this curriculum called Everyday Speech that offers hundreds of video modeling lessons. Okay, but my last proactive strategy, I'll admit, is a bit of a cheat because it basically combines everything we've already talked about, but I am obsessed with a good toolkit. Self-regulation is just not one size fits all. So giving students a set of personalized tools is going to offer like ownership, right? It's your toolkit. So I like to have students explore different strategies and like physically place it in a bag or a toolbox. So I would print and laminate maybe a picture of them doing the breathing exercise or doing the stretch that they found comforting. And they would actually put that in their toolbox. And if the tools in your toolbox are no longer working, that means we need to revisit it. And so it's kind of constantly evolving, and it's an opportunity to like just frequently be checking in. And to help you start this conversation, you'll all get Everyday Speeches Toolbox activity, which is going to include some icons and a printable build your own toolbox. So this is one of my favorite activities on the platform, actually, because it just makes a really meaningful hands-on session. So before we move on to like the tough moments, because I know that's probably why you're all here, because you have those every day, I would just love to hear kind of what of the proactive strategies we just talked about um, are you most excited about? So I just launched that. Okay, you can select as many as you want. Okay, I love that we have some responsibility interest. Clearly that was my favorite, and some self-monitoring. Awesome. It's great to see a little bit of interest everywhere. So hopefully that gave you a little reset on some things that you can try. Okay, now it's time to get real though, because even with the best proactive strategies in place, we know that dysregulation is still going to happen. So I hear you. I can hear my brother, who is a level 4 EBD teacher, saying, "Yeah, setting up a calming corner is great, but I spend my day putting out fires," right? And I hear you, because many of you are, your days look like de-escalation, diffusing, and just navigating really, really tough moments. And I've been there, and I want to acknowledge that that's a lot of emotional labor. So again, another poll. Let's just get a feel for how many of you are, oh, I didn't end the last poll. Stop sharing. There we go. Sorry. So how often are you intervening with a student experiencing significant dysregulation? I was just kind of curious to get a feel for our audience here. Okay, so those initial results are coming in, and as I expected, um, more often than not, we have individuals here that are intervening multiple times a day, daily, weekly, all of this having a huge impact on, your workload. So this next section isn't necessarily about having all the answers, I apologize, but it is going to give you some reminders and strategies to help when things get hard. So whether you try something new today or you just feel reassured that you're handling things the best you can, I'm going to take that as a win. So let's talk for a second about reactive strategies, the tools we use when students are already heightened. So we already talked a bit about co-regulation. So when students are dysregulated, they're not really accessing their reasoning and logical sides of their brain, and they need to borrow our calm, right? So we're talking about staying in a neutral stance, keeping our voice low and slow. We're mirror invalidating. I think, anyone who's been in a relationship here knows that the words calm down are probably not the most effective, and that is the same for children as well. Acknowledgement is often more effective than advice in this moment, right? And I also am a big fan of matching their energy with yours. So if they get louder, you get quieter. If they're pacing, you're still, right? So they're going to begin to mirror you and what you're doing. And even though you're not verbally asking them to stop shouting, you're asking them with what you're doing. And when we regulate ourselves first, that's going to be the most effective strategy. And sometimes that means taking out. And if you have a good support system and team around you, hopefully that's something that you can do if needed. One of the best lessons I learned from an SLP friend is a dysregulated brain does not process complex language. And I was guilty of talking at my students so much in these moments of heightened dysregulation, and their brains just weren't absorbing what I was saying at all. And yet, so often when kids are escalated, it's when we hear the most language from adults and sometimes multiple people talking at them at once. So let's instead just swap for like very clear short directions. And when in doubt, just kind of providing either visual or silent support. And I'm going to circle back to my timers because this is why they're so effective. I would have students storm into my office, slam the door, collapse onto my little mini IKEA couch. And instead of jumping in with words, I would just give them a reassuring nod and set that timer and say nothing at all. And by the time like 3 to 5 minutes had passed, most of my students would be breathing normally and ready to communicate. And I didn't further any further dysregulation because it was kind of just this unspoken agreement that they could just be for a moment. And it would, of course, always make me laugh later when adults would say, "What did you say to them?" Because honestly, sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. But if my usual strategies weren't working and I could tell that their bodies were tense, I'm a big fan of proprioceptive input, that pushing, pulling, heavy work. I'd encourage students to like push the wall, a chair. If you have a safe space, like a sensory room, like I had students that liked stacking chairs, or of course, if they are safe with their body and they're not a threat to themselves or others, like they can move my furniture around. Like, do you want to rearrange the classroom? Like, pushing something heavy, activities that require this input are just going to help regulate their nervous system. And although their Minnesota days it's a rare warm day, a walk outside doesn't hurt either. But when the body starts to regulate, the brain really will follow. And probably my most important message is that choice equals control. So when a student is dysregulated, they're often feeling very powerless. And one of the best ways we can support them is to offer really clear choices. This isn't about giving up your authority, because that was often a question that was asked of me. It's just giving them a sense to regain control of their environment. And these choices can be so small. The smaller, the better. Do you want to sit here or there? Do you need a snack? Like, is your blood sugar low? Do you want to be with, Mr. M or me, right? Like these tiny little questions give them some power back because we all know how awful it is to come home from a stressful day of work and be asked, what do you want for dinner? Like, I don't want an open-ended question. I want, do you want pizza or tacos, right? Like options are so much easier to navigate. And I am kind of flying through these last couple slides, but of course, I'm not going to skip over the repair because there is a Goldilocks method to repair and reflection. If we introduce it too soon, you risk further dysregulation, but if you're too late, that teachable moment is gone. So there's a sweet spot. So usually by the end of the day, if it happened earlier in the day or the next morning when emotions have settled. And we're not just asking about what they think they can do differently, but also how we can be a better support. So I have some questions here, but honestly, my favorite question is, did anything make you feel worse? Because sometimes as adults, I've learned that we unintentionally do things that are really upsetting our students and that we think are helping, right? So by having this repair and reflection, we can better prepare for next time. And sometimes kids don't want to linger on the incident, in which case we go back to role playing, and I might subtly, like a month or two from now, introduce a role playing activity that may or may not be influenced by something that happened in the past. And all of a sudden, this kid can look at it with a fresh perspective. Okay, so I know we're kind of running up against the clock, but before we move into questions, I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge that self-regulation is a journey. And some days it feels like very little progress is being made. But, like I said, with planting those seeds, they're growing, right? And so if nothing else, I hope today can give you a fresh perspective or simply the reassurance that you are doing a really good job. It's just a really hard job some days. Um, so with that, I would like to take some questions. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A. I'm also going to launch our feedback poll. It's just 2 questions, and I promise you we read every comment and we love the opportunity to learn. So I'm going to leave that open for a little bit. And I'm going to check the Q&A.
And so, Jess, one of the questions that we wanted to answer live, here's the question that came through. How do you best prevent students from using sensory objects as toys to avoid work versus teaching students to use them when they need? So one of the things that our team wanted to share is, you know, really teaching self-awareness with those students, setting clear expectations, providing structured choices. And part of that explicit instruction is that these are tools, they're not toys, helping to define where and when they can use those tools. And if there's still a challenge, really trying alternative strategies like movement breaks, flexible seating, or different work formats.
Yeah, I love that. I completely echo it. Going back to what I said in the beginning about, these spaces are only good as the pre-teaching that is provided. I would really explicitly, there is a reason why in, elementary schools, the whole first week of school is just spent setting expectations, classroom routines, right? Um, and so think of these tools and these spaces as, very similarly, really explicitly lay out the expectations for, how we use this space. I, as the adult, might role play and model that. And then ask some really explicit questions like, what if someone for some reason wanted to throw this at someone else? Or what if someone took a tool outside of the calming corner? What do you think we would do? And kind of like set up some, you know, in someone with a classroom, it might be like a classroom or a community agreement for the calming corner space or for the sensory tools. But in a case such as my own, it's just kind of the expectations of how we are in Mrs. Anderson's room, right? And so naturally, when we set expectations, we also talk about like what would make Miss Anderson think that maybe we needed to take a break from using these tools, or maybe we needed to use different tools, right? Because maybe those more tangible items are not like a great first step. Like maybe they first need to, demonstrate that they're able to use some different tools like their breathing strategies or something a bit more structured before those other things are introduced. So, that's why I did make reference to natural consequences because I do think it's important. And we just want to ensure that, things are these things are helpful. And at the end of the day, if they're not, I've had to have honest conversations with students about how, hey, I'm noticing that you're using this tool and it doesn't seem to be helping. Can you tell me more about that? Um, let's see, I'm looking at some other questions. We will be having a lot more webinars in the future. This is our definitely our goal to continue these on a monthly basis. So just keep looking out for them. Seeing one about a strategy to assist students who are experiencing separation anxiety. I think this is very common as well in the elementary setting. I found it most helpful to provide like a transition item. So maybe it's something that the parent or guardian provides the child to transition with, or maybe it's like a landing space. So these might be students that I set up on like a check-in, check-out basis. So they have something positive at school that they're going to do right away when they get there, something to look forward to. It might be something that they're bringing from home that's kind of a comfort item initially, and then we kind of set up a plan for how we're going to like scaffold and step back from that. But certainly doesn't hurt to have another adult in their corner who's kind of creating a positive place to land, I like to say. I have a student who has a hard time regulating his physical body. He never wants to take a movement break and gets upset when I tell him his body needs it. Would giving choices of physical movement be a good next step? Yeah, I think, having that honest conversation about like, this is what you're observing and what you're noticing. Maybe the student's just not familiar with what the choices might look like, and maybe a more unconventional body break is what the student might be looking for. And this is where those responsibility-based interventions come so much into help, because sometimes I would like trick a student into taking a break, right? I would be like, oh my goodness, we just got a truckload of new curriculum and the office needs help delivering all these textbooks to, so-and-so's classroom. And so magically the books always got delivered and the student got a body break. So yes, I would present kind of a menu of body break choices. And if you're still running into issues, I think there's a good opportunity for intervention through responsibility. All right. Okay, so you're having a student who refuses to reflect on what's happened. I feel like I ran into this a lot, and I kind of make a note of this in the slides as well. It's like there are definitely students who just do not want to dwell on the moment. And I think it brings like particular like shame and bad feelings because, they're not proud of their behavior. And so I think, when we think about a teachable moment, the more that we can go back to those like proactive strategies, less about what happened and more about what would you do in the future if this happened again? Or maybe you totally drop the situation, but like 2 days later, you're bringing in some kind of scenario-based questioning, or what would you do? And you're building the toolbox around that, very realistic, this is going to happen again in the near future, and planning around that instead of the previous incident. Thank you so much for these questions. Like, I definitely feel you all, and I know that, there's so many parts that can be challenging to navigate. I do want to leave time for Mariah, and I know we're kind of running up against the clock. Um, I am more than happy to follow up with anyone after today's webinar, but you know, hopefully you all reported in the poll what you want to hear more of, and we can continue providing some great content. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And for anyone who is at time or busy, you can definitely hop off. But we did want to give you a chance to see the platform if you're not familiar. Let's see. Why will it not? Am I still sharing?
You are. I can see if I can take over. I'll send you a request.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
There we go.
Oh, stop share. The big red button at the top of the screen. Okay, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no problem. All right, there we go. Okay, so I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes and show off a little bit of what we have within everyday speech that can support self-regulation and back up a lot of what Duncan and Jess were talking about today. If you're familiar with this at all, this may look a little bit different. So I'm going to show you where our mindfulness materials are now. And I'm going to stick in elementary school today, but just so you know, we do have pre-K through 12th grade resources. But since this was aimed at elementary, I'm going to make sure we stay there for your kiddos. If you're looking to start off a lesson with one of our mindfulness materials, or if you're just needing to break one out to kind of help a student self-regulate at any point in time, you can come straight here. One I really love and want to show off today is our box breathing game. It's really fun to be able to do as a class or have the student do on their own. And because it is in game format, it's pretty engaging. I did try to
helps your
do
brain.
my share my sound, but it would not let me check the box. So there is a really calming sound with this. You just unfortunately can't hear it right now, but I'll click in. So really we're talking about box breathing, inhale, hold. It'll count for you for the student to help them know how long they should be holding for, how long they should exhale, and really work on those calming strategies. And again, really fun, just a way for them to feel like they're engaging and they're getting to do it.
1, 2.
Let me also show you, move this.
We can hear Mariah too, just so you know.
You can hear the sound. Perfect. Awesome. I was so worried because I have a video I wanted to show off too, and I didn't think you'd be able to hear it. Great. Okay, well, that makes me feel so much better. So the next thing I want to show you is specifically our intervention materials for elementary school. We have a full section based on self-regulation skills with multiple goals under that skill to really like hone in and reinforce it. I want to show you a little bit about using your self-controller since that's something we referenced today and some strategies to help you with self-control. So if you're working on the skill and you find the goal you want to work on with the student, we have multiple units to support those. And each of our lessons take about 20 to 30 minutes that you can work on with the student. They're all going to have video modeling, videos within there, but also different games and interactive activities as well. So I did want to show just a little clip of one of our videos so you can get a good idea of what those look like and how that could work for your students.
All right, class, you earned a fun Friday. We're going to watch a movie for the rest of the afternoon.
I'm starting to get really upset. I should use my self-controller scanner. This movie's too loud. It's hurting my ears. I need to let Mr. Chang know that the sound is too loud for me. I can ask for my headphones. Excuse me, the sound is hurting my ears. Can I get my headphones?
Of course. Thank you for letting me know. I'll turn it down a bit for you too. Did Bruno use his self-controller scanner to stay calm that time? He did. Let's see what everyone is thinking.
It felt good to ask for what I needed. Now I can watch the movie.
It's no big deal. Bruno just needed his headphones. Everybody's different.
Bruno picked a strategy that worked best for him that time. By speaking up, he was able to stay in control of his feelings. Learning to speak allows us to get what we need really quickly. That's why we use our self-controller scanner to help us.
So I'm going to pause there, but that gives you a really good example of what it looks like in our videos to have student modeled, different student modeled videos in there for you. They're all age appropriate. So those early elementary kids are going to have kids their age, elementary, and then high school. It's going to age up for them as well. We do have multiple skills that you can pick from and different goals under each of those skills. And then if we do have a lot of material for you to pick from. So if you know you want to work on a specific skill with a student, but you're not going to go through the whole lesson that day, you can easily search up here too, either by videos, activities, or our games only. But I did want to show you one of our really fun games that I think would be a really awesome tool specifically for self-regulation. Click in. So these are really great because they are games, and we all know kids love to play games. They're really engaged with them, but it's a really fun way for them to learn too. So I'm going to skip through a little bit to not do the full tutorial, but I'll show you a little bit about what you actually do in the game. So there is some playing. They'll get to play, they'll get to have a little bit of fun, but our lessons are reinforced in here too. So prompts will pop up during the games to kind of help work on that self-control. There'll be a question, and then they can pick whatever is the best. We do best and better responses. So for this one, what's a physical clue that you're beginning to lose self-control? Maybe it's trouble focusing on your schoolwork, heart races, steady heart rate. I'm just going to pick one. Confirm. So this was the better answer, but not the best option. So you can go through and it'll show kids maybe what would have been the best option or how they answered. But they're just really fun ways for your kids to get to interact and reinforce what you're learning. And we have so much material to pick from. If you're interested in learning more about our skills or talking more about self-regulation, your partnership manager would love to get with you one-on-one, and we can really give you a more of a deep dive into the program. But I'll pass it back to you, Jess.
Thanks, Mariah. It's great to see everyone's interest, and for those of you loving everyday speech, we love that you love it. We love it too. And for those of you interested in learning more, like Mariah said, you can sign up for a demo on our page, everydayspeech.com, and we also offer free trials for anyone interested. So learn more about that in the follow-up, but we just thank you all for coming today and for participating and for learning alongside us all. And yeah, we'll continue these webinars in the future. We plan one for every month, so.
Yep, and I
And the
just wanted to
next
say on
one,
that note.
oh,
Oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Brittany.
You could go ahead, Duncan. I just want to say thanks so much, Jess. Thanks everybody for coming. And here, I'll let Duncan introduce our next webinar.
I was going to say that our next webinar is going to be on March 18th. The focus is going to be on supporting mental health, working with students that are challenged with anxiety, and we hope to see you all there.
Thanks, everyone.